G'day mate, 40 here. So I saw that Colin Liddell profiled the prolific blogger Z-Man, who pretty much churns out a new column every day. Like, how does he do it? Now, I haven't followed Z-Man very much the last 4 years because I find his columns are just a series of assertions about reality. So unlike a Steve Saylor who tries to argue from data, Z-Man just piles on a lot of assertions, so I don't feel value there. Like anyone can assert anything. There's no payoff for me as a reader. But he does very effectively feed an audience. So I didn't realize he'd been doxxed by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Apparently he's a software salesman. But I just checked out his blog. Started off going on Colin Liddell's website, Neocrat, and seeing who's who in the alt-right Z-Man profile. Then I read the Southern Poverty Law Center docs from February of this year. Then I went to Z-Man's blog, and so he's still churning out the columns every day. So it doesn't sound necessarily like he's been fired or that his life's been devastated, and didn't detect any change in his tone. So he doesn't seem beaten down, right? He's become a celebrity on the alt-right, and he feeds his audience, right? They like what he says. He apparently makes approximately $50,000 a year in donations, which is pretty good. And he does that by effectively, giving the audience, the certainty that they want. That the world essentially is fixed against them. So I first, what is the Mandela effect? I've forgotten. Wasn't he doxxed before? I don't know. But what's the Mandela effect? But he started off as a race realist. Now it seems like he's gotten lost in conspiracy theories. Now, the Southern Poverty Law Center takedown was very careful. I mean, they really marshaled their data. And so the Southern Poverty Law Center is a professional organization with tens of millions of dollars in assets, and when they go after someone, they do it with great care. But let's have a look at the Colin Liddell profile on Neocrat. And so that's why I was saying, like, why would anyone choose an avatar like this? So it is a very curious avatar for Z-Man. Like, why does he choose an avatar the selling of a young boy? Right? What the hell's going on there? So once anonymous blogger who was outed in February 2022 as John Christopher Zander, 55, software salesman residing in suburbs of Baltimore. His identity became known, ironically, due to a data breach at a domain registrar and web host Epic, which was a service that he strongly recommended. So I remember Z-Man posting comments in Steve Saylor section 2014 or so. And then he turned into a blogger, race realist around 2015, kind of a paleo-conservative type. And he's written for Takis magazine. He may be of partial Italian-American background, says Colin. He overreacted to an article that cast aspersions on Italian valor in World War II. So it's funny, he's presents himself as a data guy, but very emotional. Like, he reacts very emotionally to things. So he started his Z-Man blog in 2013 after a history on comment sections and message boards. So he started out as fairly sane and nuanced on the JQ, other racial issues, but he allowed himself to become associated with actual Nazis by writing for Countercurrents. There's a strong streak of boomer fatalism and conspiracy theories. Now, why is his chosen avatar from homoerotic artwork by the German artist Ludwig Diesch? Shows the German barbarian Alaric the Visigoth being offered a small male child. Right? What's going on here? Like, why would he choose an avatar of this Visigoth being offered a small male child by a dark-haired man for unknown reasons. Like, what the hell is the payoff? Like, why would anyone choose that as their avatar? That is a bit weird. So, Southern Poverty Law Center, prolific white nationalist personality identified. So yeah, I do remember him as fairly nuanced back, 2013, 2014, 2015. And then as he became more successful, he became increasingly captured by his audience and increasingly fatalistic and into conspiracy theories. So the Z-Man's a white nationalist internet personality, pulls in thousands of dollars per month churning out racist propaganda, rubs shoulders with white nationalists at conferences on both sides of the Atlantic without ever showing his face. But based on research and analysis, Hate Watch believes it has identified the person behind the pseudonym. So Z-Man gets a ton of traffic. Like, how does he do this? Because it's not with the careful data analysis of a Steve Saylor. It's with fairly emotional columns where he makes a series of assertions about the world and how it's headed to hell, and there are dark, sinister forces arrayed against us. Like, why is this so successful? And I think a good answer for this can be found in Decoding the Gurus, the latest podcast. Says interview with Manveer Singh on gurus and shamans.
Yeah, so we could break it down at a couple levels. Most generally, the argument was that shamanism reliably develops in human societies everywhere because it is just an incredibly compelling means of controlling uncertainty. And I can break that down a little, but the idea is essentially people want control over the uncertain in their lives.
Yeah, so that's what makes pundits successful, right? As opposed to being right or wise or true or good. What makes them successful is that they give people assurance, just like successful clergy give people assurance. Like a successful Christian clergy gives people assurance of their salvation. Like a successful Jewish clergy gives people assurance about the greatness of being Jewish. People want assurance in this atomized, uncertain world. So whether it's gurus, religious figures, bloggers, YouTubers, pundits, politicians, right? People are looking for assurance, and there's an enormous market for people who can sound fully assured. So I often get comments, how do you react to Z-Man's latest column where he's very, confidently pronouncing on this conspiracy theory or that conspiracy theory, and I'd throw up my hands and say, I don't know how to respond to it. It's just, a series of unprovable assertions, without any evidence given for them. Like, how do you react to that? Well, he has a substantial audience. People react, to the emotional assurance that he gives them, essentially that the world is biased against them, that dark, sinister forces have conspired to rig the world against them, and so therefore they're not responsible for their own misery. And there's an enormous audience for this, and for shamans and the like.
Both informationally, so we want information about all of this stuff, and then we also want outcomes to happen in our...
Yeah, information. So people who are verbally fluent, right? People who have strong rhetorical gifts that can master an enormous audience. Now, there's absolutely no connection between the gracefulness with which you speak or write. There's no connection between your rhetorical firepower and you being right or true or good. There's just no connection between these things. But if you sound assured, people feel assured. Like if you sound confident, people feel confident. Like people take strength from your rhetorical firepower and your rhetorical fluency, and that makes for success. But there's absolutely no connection between that and being right. So, I'm trying to think of this Fox Sports personality, Colin Coward. He talked in a 2015 interview, I think, with The Ringer. He said, "There's no money in being right, right? when he gives his strong opinions on sports, his success has absolutely nothing to do with being right. Right? The money is in being interesting. So with punditry, the money is in being interesting and in offering assurance and sounding like you know what you're talking about, even though you may not.
In our favor. And that creates these kinds of markets of magic. Specialists are competing to provide the most compelling services, the most compelling means of controlling uncertainty, and that drives the evolution.
Yeah, that's a good description of YouTuber pundits. All right, we're competing in a narrow market to provide people with assurance in an incredibly complicated, atomized, ever-changing world where there's no basis in fact for many of the assurances that we're doling out. So if you go to JFGRP, you get a reliable alt-right libertarian perspective on life, and he sounds very convincing. Richard Spencer, whatever position he's taking, he always sounds very convincing, right? So these are shamans of assurance and comfort and excitement.
Evolution of this incredibly psychologically compelling cluster of practices to essentially convince clients that this individual can provide them with exactly what they need. And I can go a bit into more like what those techniques are, but that's the general perspective on shamanism.
And so also with influencers, right? They're here to provide you with something you need because these are extraordinary individuals. And one of the ways that people show how extraordinary they are is by intermittent fasting, right? So people who do things that you don't want to do, feel like you can't do, like workouts, intermittent fasting, bathing in cold water for 15 minutes every morning, all right? So walking 10 miles a day, or lifting huge amounts of weight, right? If you want to put yourself out there as a pundit and a YouTuber, right, who's making a strong emotional connection with people and meeting their emotional needs for assurance, then really helps to portray yourself as having an extraordinary story and extraordinary gifts and superhuman abilities, such as intermittent fasting, lifting extraordinary amounts of weight, extraordinary workouts, extraordinary mental workouts, physical workouts, right? You need to show that you're not the average Joe, right? You've got something special. And then people get comfort that they're connected to someone with something special.
So in that framework, that compelling cluster of features, cognitively compelling and socially compelling cluster of features.
Right, so what is cognitively, socially, psychologically compelling? All right, verbal fluency, rhetorical power, a sense of confidence, assurance, strength that just shines out through the words. Someone who comes across as seeing things clearly, and someone who's going to assure you of what you need assurance on, someone who's going to divine what's going on in this confusing world, kind of break it down in a way that you can understand and that feels good and helps you feel more prepared and stronger, better able to struggle with the challenges that life puts before all of us.
What are they? What are the key ones?
Yeah, so the thing that I argue in that piece, in which I really focus on that piece, in which I use as a perspective on all of these, is different practices that make an individual seem different from normal humanity, and in so doing make it seem more plausible or more
right. So if you want to be an influencer or a pundit, it helps to, or a preacher, set yourself out from ordinary humanity. All right, extraordinary workouts, intermittent fasting, you read a book a day, you speak 5 languages. All right, anything you can do that sets yourself out from the rest of humanity, that makes you more worthy, more likely to receive adoration and develop a following.
more tenable, that they have special powers. So in something that I'm writing right now.
Right, so do you believe that someone's got special powers? Well, if they can do extraordinarily long fasts that you can't do, if they can do workouts that you can't do, if they do mental challenges that you can't do, if they have gifts with language, with learning, with degrees, with accomplishments, all sorts of things that you can't, then you might get more emotional assurance that this is an extraordinary person with extraordinary powers, and that you will get a little taste of that extraordinariness by listening to them, connecting with them, right? You know, vicariously, you can become more than what you are just by connecting with them.
Now I'm thinking about these all as I'm trying to coin this word, or I was like, there needs to be a word for this process, and I've been thinking about this word xenize, which comes from like xenos meaning foreign or other, and it's like using all of these techniques to look like you are fundamentally different from normal humanities, but you observe a lot of deprivation. You have these dramatic initiations.
Right. So the YouTube pundit, man, he's someone who's different from the other YouTubers, right? This is someone with special gifts, special rhetorical gifts, mental gifts, psychological gifts, social proof. He can do workouts that you can't do. He's gone to universities that you haven't attended. He's made amounts of money that you'll never be able to make. Like he's trekked in the Himalayas. He's walked to the Antarctica. All right, so you have to set yourself apart if you want to develop a following. He's converted to Orthodox Judaism.
Where you claim that your skeleton has been reconstructed. You talk about like dying and coming back to life, about having your body parts replaced with new body parts. All of these are about a practitioner undergoing some kind of fundamental transformation, about like drifting away from normal humanity, and that makes it more plausible, more compelling, more tenable that they can do things that normal humans cannot. And so related to that is trance. This thing that really defines shamanism is that they enter what seem to be these non-ordinary states. And some people will argue that the non-ordinary states, the trance of shamanism is all about what trance psychologically does.
And the compelling YouTuber, right? They enter a different state. They're on. They're alive. They're captivating. They're compelling, right? The YouTuber, the shaman, preacher man, the salesman.
But creates greater insight. It allows you to be a better problem solving, whatever. What I'm arguing is that, yes, trance might have these effects, but the reason that trance so often occurs is it's kind of this performance of otherness. It's this individual who is experiencing, who is looking nothing like what a normal human does.
Right, so it's the performance of otherness, right? That's key part to becoming a successful pundit, right? You want to show that you're other, that you're different, that you have accomplishments that other people don't have. You've had experiences that other people don't have, that you have physical, rhetorical, moral, spiritual, psychological, social skills that other people don't have, right? Who wants to, watch someone like them? And people want to watch someone who's other, someone who's different, someone who's extraordinary. You get extraordinary through your connection with them.
It does, and that makes it more compelling, more credible that they are doing something that normal humans cannot do. Is that all clear?
Yeah, very clear. And there's kind of two immediate parallels that like crop up to me. The obvious one related to the show that you're currently on is that we find similar sorts of narratives, obviously without the magical elements usually, depends whether Jordan Peterson is talking or not, but in the narratives of the gurus that we look at, where they often have these stories about in how childhood they were recognized as, special, and in many cases it's actually presented as that they were seen to have learning difficulties or some problem, but this was later recognized as a unique way of approaching the world. So that seems to parallel, in maybe in a less dramatic, less supernatural way, the kind of narrative that you're describing shamans to go through. And that makes me, it's a very appealing image, like as the gurus of the modern secular instantiation of shamans. But we can talk about that idea. But the other one, which I'm just curious to get your thoughts on first, is so like superhero narratives and in popular media or like, anime characters in Japan, they often are represented in the same way, having these special powers and transformational experiences, and you find those in lots of myths and legends. So is the argument that is a cognitive attractor that applies broadly across all these contexts, but there's additional elements that make it flow into the shamanism stream? Or is that like slightly different when you're talking about, kind of fictional figures who you can't probably directly interact with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess we can start with the second one. The parallel you're drawing with superheroes, I think, is a great one, and that's like one that I often think about, where I think that really demonstrates this logic, where the storyteller, the narrator, the writer needs to convince you, at least in this world that they're building, that this person can shoot lasers out of their eyes, that they can be incredibly fast, that they can be a fighter or whatever, that they can do things that like the average person cannot. And
okay, let's have a look here at the Mandela effect. Widespread false memory that Nelson Mandela actually died in prison in the 1980s. Okay, false memory. Okay, is the Mandela effect a false memory? Did you hear that Yi met with Trump and they argued? No, I haven't heard that. All right, so apparently Kanye West, Nick Fuentes, and Milo is jumping on board. So Kanye met with Trump, and Trump's not going to sign on board with anything publicly, critically anti-Jewish. Oh, the Mandela effect is garbage, just shows how checked out people are. Okay. Right. This is from Decoding the Gurus. Oh, so Kanye just posted a debrief on his meetings with Trump on his Twitter. So what's extraordinary about Trump's new run for president is how professional his team is. And so they seem to have shifted him away from complaining about the 2020 election. They seem an incredibly professional group, highly accomplished. Is Trump going to have the discipline to stick with an election team that knows what they're doing and with a track record of success? Or is he going to bring in a bunch of losers like Rudy Giuliani and the clown show these clown show lawyers who are protesting the 2020 election, right? So is Trump going to be strong enough to keep ties with professionals, or is he going to bring in losers who simply flatter his ego? So right now, it looks like Trump is running a professional campaign. Do I think Trump has a chance? Yes, absolutely. I think Trump has at least a 50% chance of winning the Republican nomination, and then a 50% chance of winning the general election. So right now, Trump's team, his political team, is highly professional, highly skilled, with a winning track record. Yeah, Bibi Netanyahu was given a very solid mandate in Israel. He's mounted a very significant political comeback. I don't think Israel is clearly in the bag for DeSantis. Right? Israel will go with whoever the winner's going to be. So yeah, Bibi's got a mandate in that he's able to form a government that has a coherent ideology. So the interregnum, the Israeli coalition that excluded Bibi, had no ideological coherence. Now, Bibi Netanyahu is able to form a government that is ideologically coherent, that's all on the right wing. He doesn't have much of a margin, just a couple of seats above what the minimum necessary, but at least it's a coherent coalition. And so, yeah, he's got a right-wing mandate because everyone is on board. Everyone is right-wing, is very strong for protecting Israel, going after Israel's best interests, even if it doesn't necessarily look good. And what do we have here? Boy, you're not afraid, are you? These birds aren't very afraid, man. Not as intimidating as I used to be.
And what's really fundamental to that is explaining why they can do this and other people cannot. Like, how have they been essentially transformed to facilitate that? And that seems to explain or contribute to the fact that superhero stories are incredibly diverse. But one of the few things that all of them seem to share is an origin story. It's something that tells you why this person is other, why they deviate from humanity. I've actually lately been reading a lot into a superhero origin story, so it's good that you brought this up. And one thing that I really like about them, and that I think provides an interesting parallel for shamanism.
I have never been able to keep my attention on any superhero story. Like, they just seem like comics to me. I've never had any interest in comics. So, yeah, I plan to come back to LA. I'll be back in LA in late January, but I'm hanging out in Australia for 3 months. But I've never had any interest in superheroes or in comics. So all of my friends would, read comics, and it just seems so silly and trivial, and I can't maintain any enthusiasm, any interest in any superhero story. They're just, I don't know, it's just so aggressively low IQ. I can't be bothered to try to read deeper, greater themes into superhero stories. It's just never, ever, 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 ever appealed to me. And then when they call comics graphic novels, I can't seriously, I can't call a comic a graphic novel. Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about Watchmen, but I may just have a mental block. I just can't, it's just not my thing. I tried watching The Watchmen, the movie, the TV series, I just can't do it. It's just not my thing.
Shamanism is that they really seem to reflect people's conception of what constitutes essential transformation. So, if we go from the 1940s to now, we see that origin stories change over time. First, it's a lot about nuclear stuff, and then at points it's about magical stuff. Now it's really about like bioengineering, genetic mutants. As our conceptions of like a fundamental transformation changes, so do the stories to convince us, or to at least tell us that these individuals are different. To your broader question about like,
Yeah, I tried to watch the new Watchmen series, centered around the Tulsa history, but it was such a dramatic distortion of Tulsa history, what happened in Tulsa. I lasted, I think, 1.5 episodes. I really, truly tried to make it a go. And I love Fargo. Like, I love the movie and I love the TV series, but the latest series, the latest season with Chris Rock, again, I couldn't even make it through the first episode of that season. It was just so absurdly anti-white. It's good to watch like 1920s Soviet propaganda. Yeah, but you have to be in a particular mood. All right. So, when you're in the mood for that kind of masochism, then's the time.
how should we think about the relationship between superheroes and shaman, or of all of these narratives, these fictional narratives? So I think what's going on across them is they're reflecting this more general intuition that if a person claims to do things that normal people cannot, if they essentially like violate our concept of what a human is capable of, they have to be a different kind of entity. They have to be
Right. Think Tony Robbins, or a lot of gurus or influencers. Right. They claim to do things that ordinary people can't, like incredible feats of fasting, physical endurance, moral achievement, social, economic. Right? It's like, here, you can believe me, you can trust me, you can have faith in me because I can do these incredible things that normal people can't do.
conceptually different. In superhero stories, that deviation is used towards the narrative or the function of exploring like what someone could do if they have special powers and
And my father was like this. He was a preacher man, and he would try to exude being this other, right? Someone who was outside the realm of the normal human. He was more disciplined. He read more. He exercised more. He was more careful with his diet, with his health. He was more moral. Right? He wasn't just another flesh and blood human being, deeply flawed like the rest of us. No, he had to be extraordinary to try to reach the extraordinary heights of being a preacher man.
Thinking about the entertainment or whatever. In shamanism, this intuition is leveraged to create the experience, to create the perception that this individual can provide a service. Shamanism is a service.
So what makes for a compelling live stream? So part of it is just pure entertainment value. Part of it is informational value. And then the third key component is the spectacle. Like something, extraordinary happens that just compels your attention. And so this is also what the great salespeople do. Yeah, he's talking about shamanism, shamans. This is what the great salespeople do, the great YouTube live streamers do, the great preachers do, right? They create an extraordinary experience. Yeah, guests are important, absolutely.
In many instances, and I think some people are resistant to this idea, but shamanism is overwhelmingly a service-oriented profession in a way, and so...
Yeah, so being... Yeah, you're great. Look, any solo shows, hardcore, absolutely. Guests make things much more interesting. So being a pundit, or being a YouTuber, or being a preacher or a congregational rabbi, you are in the service industry, right? If you're going to be successful, it's because you serve your audience, right? And you serve your audience by providing them assurance where they want assurance in a complicated, confusing, dislocated, atomized world, and where you provide distraction and you tell them what feels good to them, what they want to hear, either that the world is biased against them or the world is not biased against them, that they can achieve extraordinary things, or they're the shadowy cabal who's running everything, so you shouldn't feel bad about being a loser.
They might be using similar narratives that fictional writers are, at least like on a maybe.
I think Kino Casino and TRS are very jealous of this Nick Fuentes, Kanye West. Yeah, it's an incredible spectacle. Yeah, as someone who doesn't pick a side, it's fantastic. Yeah, it's great human drama. And Nick Fuentes and Milo Yiannopoulos and Kanye West and Donald Trump are great at producing human spectacles. Right? You just can't take your eyes away from what Kanye, Nick, Trump, people like Milo Yiannopoulos. All right, it's just a train wreck quality to their lives. It's life as a performance art.
A higher level, if we think about them in this higher level comparison. But for them, it's really about using those narratives to convince you that they can provide a service that other people cannot.
Yeah,
And I think that brings us to your first topic, which we can also go into.
yeah. So I do want to I want to follow up with something that you.
Yeah, yeah, we all hope Milo Yiannopoulos is not sexually objectifying Kanye West. Like, let this be a meeting of minds and not of bodies. All right, we wish for this to be a spiritual, transcendent, Christian type of relationship here. I hope they don't give in to their carnal bodily urges. Yeah, that's right. Milo is on record of being a lecher with black men, specifically military guys. God forbid. God forbid.
To kind of restart, because in your paper you're talking about like shamanism as one of the potential first professions to emerge in societies and cross-culturally recurrent profession, and I can imagine there's some.
Yeah, so perhaps prostitute is the oldest profession, but shaman, or the person who gives assurance in a confusing, difficult world. Maybe the shaman is the preacher, the religious leader, the person who gives us a sense that all is going to be right with the world. And perhaps that's the oldest profession. But there's so many telling similarities here between the shaman, the YouTuber, the pundit, the clergyman, the influencer.
Well, actually, I don't. This is probably a question for you. So I can imagine some more progressive, liberal-minded people somewhat reactive to the notion of seeing shamans as a profession and creating narratives about their powers and that kind of stuff, because there's a somewhat of an implication of potentially exploitative, or at least.
Yeah, there's no profession that can never be exploitative. God forbid, and the space cowboy. I don't get the comment about the space cowboy, glib medley. But there's no profession that is exempt from being exploitative, and certainly shamans and religious leaders, YouTubers and influencers are highly capable of being exploitative. But I didn't see all these parallels before. I understood that the radio host, the YouTuber, the pundit was primarily to tell people what they wanted to hear and give them a sense of assurance. That was a So I Married an Axe Murderer reference. Okay, don't know that movie or TV show.
Deceitful approach to things. But on the other hand, I know from anthropology that shamans very much regard what they're doing, yes, as a calling, but also as that's their profession and that's what they do. So I'm wondering, your article, I know for evolutionary anthropologists or that kind of thing, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to discuss shamanism as a profession. But do you get pushback from like putting a potentially Western modern frame?
Mike Myers. I just don't find him very funny. Right? Just not my cup of tea. I'm more of a Monty Python type of bloke.
On a practice which it doesn't fit well onto, and relatedly, how do the people in the communities react? Are they aware of your kind of theory around shamanism, and how do they react to that?
Okay, that's a great question. There's a lot there, so I'll start to address whatever I remember, and then we can dig in.
So listening to this discussion, it reminds me of an observation that if you feel like you understand your religion, you're not religious, right? That if you are, authentically religious or spiritual person, you're participating in a mystery, something that is way beyond your ken. Mike Myers, he's Canadian but mostly loved by Americans. It just seems like fairly lowbrow humor. But this theory of shamanism, all right, just like theories of religion, right? If you feel like you understand your religion, you feel like you understand type of spirituality that you subscribe to, or you feel like you know understand that the shaman, you have stepped outside. You've stepped outside the realm of religion or of the shaman, right? When you critically analyze things, it makes it verging on the impossible to enjoy them in the same way.
Yeah. So it was actually being in Mentawai that really highlighted for me the extent to which shamanism is centered around a service. And it's a bit complicated because on the one hand, shamans are, so in Mentawai they're known as Sikere, and they are regarded as special, powerful humans, and they're charismatic, and they provide a center to social, spiritual, political life. On the other hand, it's quite clear to many people that it's a service because you're
Shamanism and medicine have a similar ritual aspect. Yeah, if you're going to the doctor for assurance, or because you feel lonely or confused, or there's something going on with you and you can't quite put your finger on it. Yeah, there's an emotional comfort element, the bedside manner to medicine. Medicine contains scientific elements, just like psychology contains scientific elements. Door-to-door sales contains scientific elements, but medicine is not a science. It contains elements of science. Yeah, the white coat. Yeah, that's a good point. The bedside manner. All the different things. Like when they tap on your back and they listen to your lungs, right? It just has absolutely nothing to do with your health. It's just people feel better when the doctor touches them and performs certain procedures, even though these particular procedures, which are about the most common things in the world, that tapping your knee, getting a response, right? None of these have any efficacy except an emotional, psychological efficacy of making people feel like they're being cared for.
You're sick, you have to choose among these Sikere. They have to, you're evaluating different ones. There's constant talk about who's, to what is his trans fake? Does he really know the songs? Like, is he truly a Sikere? Is he just a Sikere because, his dad was able to, whatever, pay them?
And is it always a he, by the way, in those communities?
Yeah, it's slightly complicated. So the word Sikere refers to both individuals in a couple. So the couple is usually male and female. Or actually, every example I know is male and female. But it is the man who is called to. So a simple answer to your question is yes, it's a he. But it's a bit more complicated because both of them are known as Sikere. They heal in something called papete, healing ceremonies. And in the healings,
MDMA was used by therapists for a couple of decades before it got banned. Yeah, if the doctor or the therapist or the psychiatrist is able to give the patient, a substance, there's going to be, frequently a positive effect, right? The placebo effect, right? Even if there is no inherent value in the substance. So I'm all down with the placebo effect. It wouldn't bother me if any of the supplements I take only have a placebo effect. I'm happy to benefit from the placebo effect. The world is such a big buzzing confusion and so challenging that if there's something that brings comfort, I'm totally down with it. Right? The things that bring me comfort and that work for me and buoy me up, they don't have to always make rational sense. In fact, they're often much more comforting and effective if they are completely outside the realm of the rational.
healing ceremonies, it's almost always the male who is called. I actually, in my data set of 40-something ceremonies, don't have a single one in which a female is called, although I spoke to a doctor who's been in Mentawai for a long time, and she has said that she has seen or heard of females being called, so I don't want to say that females are never called.
These are like female deities or spirits that are...
No, sorry, the female in the couple. Like a woman Sikere, a woman shaman.
I was thinking symbolically like a male and female, but you mean actual couples.
Yeah, so I'll give you a simple version, and then if we want to, we can go into the complex version. A simple version is, in Mentawai, overwhelmingly, men are shaman and men are called.
So how often do you read Z-Man? I'm just curious how often people dip into him, how much of a common audience we might have. It's been about 4 years since I've paid much attention to him because I just couldn't deal with the assertion upon assertion upon assertion style that he has, turning out his daily column. But I used to get asked back in the day, what do you think about Z-Man's latest column? Very compelling, where it makes the argument that there's this shadowy conspiracy that's running things.
Called called teal in healing ceremonies. Male shamans are believed to have the power to see spirits, and they provide these services. The more complicated thing is that when a shaman is initiated, both he and his wife have to observe particular taboos. Both he and his wife come to be known as sikere, and
Yeah, it's like my dad, the Seventh-day Adventist preacher, he would never go inside a movie theater because when we were Seventh-day Adventists don't go to theaters. So even after he left the church, he still wanted to maintain, that level of purity. And Orthodox rabbis that I hang out with back in the days when there were blockbusters, they wouldn't step inside a blockbuster, in case that was misinterpreted as they were going to see something salacious, even though Blockbuster obviously didn't rent pornography. So, yeah, to be a shaman or to be a religious spiritual hero or an influencer or a particular type of YouTuber, like there are all sorts of normal human endeavors and activities and frailties that you just can't participate in. Yeah, apparently Z-Man's on Taki's Mag. I haven't seen that. I haven't read that. That's what Colin Liddell reported.
there are a couple of these wives I know of who are also regarded as having these special powers. And although I have never seen them called in one of these abete, one of these kind of all-day healing ceremonies, I have heard that these women are sometimes called in like more private healing.
I used to like Gregory Hood. Yeah, I interviewed Z-Man. He was on my show, and it was fine. And I used to enjoy some Gregory Hood, but much of the Distant Right has just become too conspiratorial, too much of a, I don't know, isolation in a silo. It's like, people in polite society are usually encouraged, not to talk about, racial differences, but then people get red-pilled, and then that's, all they can talk about. And so I remember when I interviewed F. Roger Devlin, he said the only news sources he consulted were the websites he wrote for, VDare, American Renaissance, Countercurrents, websites like that. And so I noticed with a lot of the most prolific members of the Distant Right, they only read sources from, within the group. And that makes them, to me, boring, not terribly effective. I want someone who's grappling with all sorts of different perspectives. Yeah, he calls Baltimore Lagos. That's his in-group joke about Baltimore.
Healing contexts. So, yeah.
I'm sorry for sidetracking you, but that was a very clear explanation. And I'll remind you as well that you were explaining about the reaction to your framework and stuff. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of a complicated thing because in Mentoe, people recognize that Tsikere are competing and that you choose them on the basis of who seems the best. But there's a double narrative where you never want to signal that. So sometimes I'll talk to someone and I'll be like, why did...
So YouTubers are like rival gangs, right? Who go, raid each other's territories. There's like definitely like a gang-like social dynamic to the followers of various YouTubers.
Why did you choose these Tsikere to come and heal you? And they'll say, oh, they were nearby, or they're my wife's relatives. But of course, the wife has many relatives in this area. There are many Tsikere nearby. And then when I've talked to other people, it's like, yes, we want to talk like that because if we get sick and other Tsikere are not available, we don't want to give the impression that we prefer some over others, or that we think that some are good and others are not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you are ranking them and comparing them in your mind, but you don't want to do that verbally because you don't want people to feel like you undervalue them or maybe publicly offend them.
Yeah. So I imagine there are concepts of like honor or equivalents to honor in play, like fiat.
Yeah, it's not necessarily honor so for instance.
And yeah, there's a funny relationship between a YouTuber and his audience. Like some, YouTubers only want praise, and then if they ever get criticism from someone, then they're in their bad books. And then there are the people who just come on with sociopaths who just come on with excessive praise, and then they just absolutely flip on you, and they become just a torrent of hatred. So all sorts of interesting dynamics between the YouTuber and his audience.
For instance, I was recently reading this photography of Egyptian Bedouin society, or maybe Libyan Bedouins, where honor, I think, looks very, very different. In Mentoe, it's more like general reputation, It feels different from like a very honor-based society.
So just politeness, like kind of the social norm. You shouldn't denigrate people.
Yeah, it's more like politeness.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's a recognition that people, it is a profession, there are different options and so on. Then
Right, if you pray in the same synagogue, you take certain Torah classes, and then you switch out, right, it can be a really dramatic development. Like, it feels like a betrayal when you stop, taking courses from one rabbi and switch to a different rabbi, or switch to a different synagogue, switch to a different prayer minyan. I found it much more wrenching than I expected. Like, the kind of bonds that I felt myself, building up in Orthodox Judaism, and my great reluctance to threaten those bonds, to disrupt those bonds, right? Just the emotional intensity of Orthodox Judaism, the power of the community over me, the power of forming a bond with a rabbi, the loss of freedom that would come with forming bonds with a community, with people, with a rabbi, the kind of ironclad nature of the commitment that would just, wrap you up like these invisible cords of connection and commitment. That just kind of snuck up on me in Orthodox Judaism. I thought it'd be something much more amenable to, my rational analysis and choice. But you just get caught up, and it shapes you.
and yet maybe it's not entirely kosher to completely focus on the commercial aspects as like the main thing, right? Because it's dealing with spiritual powers and that kind of thing.
It's dealing with spiritual powers. It's dealing with illness.
So out of all the groups I've known, I think Jews and synagogues are the most realistic about money. Most people think somehow it's shameful to talk much about money or with much explicitness, but one thing I really appreciate about Jews and Judaism is the relaxed way of dealing with the natural passions, where the natural passions for money, for fundraising, for honor, for sex, for love, for attention, for fame, for success, right, for status. Right? I love how honest and frank and down to earth Jews are about these, basic passions that were much more repressed in my Protestant upbringing, where there was, much more reluctance to admit to being, overwhelmed by these basic passions.
Yeah, this thing it also manifests in how shamans provided their services. So it's not super appropriate for a shaman to be asked or to ask to be paid. But
a gift.
And yet it is always expected that when a shaman comes, he will sacrifice pigs and chickens, and that the shamans will get the best parts.
So yeah, it kind of takes my breath away how frank, a lot of rabbis and Jews are. And hey, our community needs this. We need to fundraise for this. We need a new building. We want to set up a school. All right. So how much can you give? And everyone gathers in the room, and we announce, out loud, how much each person, undertakes to give each month. Jews are breathtakingly effective at this kind of fundraising.
But it's a little complicated to talk about that as payment, because the shaman wants to maintain, or there's this maintenance of a perception on both the provider and the client's part, that the shaman is here to heal you, and that you are in turn sharing with the shaman. A similar thing actually occurs with food sharing in Mentawai. People will, for example, someone might they might call a lot of people to help them.
I noticed that only the most inept congregational rabbis, make it obvious that they're only interested in you if you join the synagogue, right? Most of them have good people skills. I mean, Chabad rabbis, I find, have the best people skills. Like they're the one group of Orthodox Jews who don't judge you on your level of observance. They're happy to meet you at your level. They tend to be happy, positive people. They're very good at reframing things in a way that leaves you happier as you exit the interaction or the conversation than you took going in. But there's some less socially skilled congregational rabbis who it's very clear they only have an interest in you if you join the congregation. And the chat says making money is easy. Buy the dip. Buy into the dip. All right.
them move a house or help them construct a house, and then it's expected that afterwards they will share meat. They might kill a pig and distribute the meat to everyone who shared. But it is not appropriate to, if you are given an inappropriate, or if you, let's say you help move a house or you help build a house, but then the person does not share, you can't, for instance, like demand payment. You can't fine them. You can't.
So I'm thinking about all those dissident right pundits who were making the case for Bitcoin, right? Assuring you, buy Bitcoin, buy into the dip of Bitcoin. It's, I've just bought another Bitcoin. It's just part of the charlatan and aspect of the dissident right and the abysmal judgment of many of the characters on the dissident right and the preference for trying to do things outside the system. And this need to, I know what's really going on. Like the mainstream media is not telling you the truth. So if you're going to do a YouTube show like I do, I have to come with some perspectives that you're not going to read in the New York Times, because otherwise you could just read the New York Times and get everything you need. So this predisposes the YouTuber and the guru and the pundit to conspiracy theories, because if all you can come up with are conventional mainstream perspectives, then there's no audience for that, because that need is already filled by the mainstream media. Right? The New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, NPR, they're very skilled at what they do, very good at what they do. So if you want to compete with offering opinions on the news, you're heavily incentivized to get into conspiracy theories and fringe ideas. So you tell your audience, hey, you need to come to me if you want to get this, out of the box perspective. And so this also drives much of the distant right punditry that Bitcoin's the way to go. This is the new method of finance outside the system, where we can't be deplatformed or have our checking account shut down. And so this preference for outside the system, right, sometimes it's right and sometimes it's wrong. Right? There are plenty of times when you want to work within the system, and then there are occasionally times when you want to work outside the system. But just having a default, de facto, de rigueur, de jure tendency to always look for, outside the box, outside the system solutions, that hasn't served many people on the distant right very well if they were heavily into cyber currencies, which increasingly turned out to be a disaster.
And go to someone else. And the Mentali find each other constantly. It's a society that indigenously is quite litigious, but there are certain domains in which the transactional nature is a bit
taboo.
A bit taboo.
That sounds similar to a lot of parallels I can think of, including in Japan around the provision of funeral services. There's obvious costs and money involved, but a lot of it has to be phrased in a specific way, not to make it seem profit orientated, even though a lot of it looks very much like standard capitalism, just in a specific domain. But that, I guess, a difference would
make a potluck in Western contexts.
But I'm thinking that's in the case of Korean shamanism, which I'm vaguely familiar with, it feels like there's a much more direct and overt acknowledgement of payment for services and stuff. But it'll depend on the context as to how much that is kosher. That kind of answers the question around how receptive they are. How about evolutionary anthropologists? Like I say, I think they'd be pretty open to that consideration. But do you ever get accusations that you're applying westernized, ethnocentric categories that don't make sense in indigenous perspectives?
Sure. Yeah. In many ways, and shamanism is a topic where that has long been something that people have talked about, and I think for very good reason. Earlier you have Eliade. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He's so big in the field. But he comes out with this book, Shamanism, and he talks about a very particular model of shamanism, which involves soul flight and hunting and gathering societies and animal spirits. So I define shamanism much more generally as, I think, do many people of individuals entering what appear to be.
So from an academic secular perspective, the primary purpose of religion is to provide comfort. And for an academic perspective, the primary purpose of pundits is to provide comfort. Whatever team you're on, right? The pundit's going to tell you what you want to hear. The primary purpose of a YouTuber guru who's commenting on the news of the day, right, is to provide comfort, to make you feel better, to give you assurance that is not warranted by reality. So all these various professions, pundit, preacher, YouTuber, shaman, doctor, they're here to provide comfort. That's You know, that's their primary purpose. And why is there such an enormous need for comfort? Because, you know, the modern world is discombobulating. It's atomizing. The traditional forms of, you know, enchantment and magic, you know, it's just no longer as prestigious or as valid or as common as it once was. So, you know, we move around, we lose touch with family, friends, community, and so we keep looking for comfort, whether it's on YouTube or with our shamans.
Non-ordinary states to engage with unseen realities and provide services. Eliot had a much more constrained definition, or a much more constrained framework. Siberia is the model. You know, like I mentioned, your soul leaves your body in trance. There are maybe different levels. There's a lot of importance of flight. There are animal helpers. And so people have this framework, and then they're going to different contexts, wildly diverse contexts, and applying this very particular model. So that's just to say that I think shamanism, like many topics in anthropology, has been saddled with this problem of having a particular expectation and projecting it onto the society. And I think the study of shamanism is still quite wary of that, and so of course I've confronted that. But then there is, as you talked about, like the particular way in which I frame shamanism, and that's something I'm constantly working on and constantly being careful about. The way that I really think about shamanism is that it is a technology. It's, you know, me performing deviations from normal humanness to assure you that I can do things that normal humans cannot. And
yeah, this is what preachers do, this is what YouTubers do, right? This is what pundits do, influencers do. They perform deviations from normal humanity to show you that they're special. So my father would do this with his extraordinary physical workouts, his extraordinary mental discipline. Is this from Decoding the Gurus? Yes, it's the latest episode of Decoding the Gurus, but I just think it's so applicable to YouTubers and the pundits, right? So if you want to be an influencer, whether as a preacher man, as a rabbi, as a YouTuber, as a pundit, right, you need to show how separate you are from normal human concerns. So you don't watch football, all right? You don't watch TV, or you're into intermittent fasting, or, you know, you just eat an all meat diet, or, you know, you bench press 400 pounds, or, you know, you just got back from a week-long silent retreat, right? You have to emphasize how different you are from normal human beings, and then that provides a basis for people believing that you're extraordinary and that you might have extraordinary powers.
this can be used for good. You know, Holly Wiesner is an anthropologist who works with these South African, the Jews on sea. I'm like wary about saying their name because I don't feel confident in my ability to like properly do clicks.
It's better than mine, trust me, trust me.
But so she was recently telling me about a time when she was in the field and she woke up screaming. She was incredibly anxious, and they immediately started a trance dance. Some of the people in the camp went into trance and they healed her. You know, they're putting their hands on her. They're entering trance, and she talked about like really feeling love, really feeling. The way that it's conceptualized there is like half death, that you are going to.
So if people at your synagogue or your church, all right, if they pray for you, right, you're going to feel loved and you're going to feel better. Yes. So I was nervous going into halftime. The Cowboys were trailing 13-6. There's this great website here, KO Sports, where for about $27 a month I can get almost all my sporting needs met live. So watching the Cowboys come back to a 28-20 victory, very solid win over the Giants today. They were magnificent in the second half. And then I'm watching the World Cup on SBS. That's the multicultural channel started up in Australia. So ABC is the government-sponsored highbrow channel, and then they started SBS for, you know, Australia's, you know, many diverse communities. When Australia opened up immigration in the 1970s, one of the benefits of that is that we got SBS. So SBS and the ABC, they aim at an audience with an average IQ of around 108, 110, while the commercial channels, they seem to aim at an average IQ audience of around 95.
To the edge of death is an incredibly dangerous or risky endeavor, and so everyone coming out, everyone clapping all night, these shamans showing up for you, really is a demonstration of commitment, of investment. And she said the next day she felt so much better. And so I just want to provide that as an example of a case where, you know, I think it's a technology that could be used positively or has many positive effects. But I think that it also is often used for exploitation.
So I was wondering what it was. Right, see this little green fella here? like he just kind of fell onto my neck, and I smacked him, and I thought that he was a piece of grass. And now I see this piece of grass is moving. So he just alighted on my neck as I was providing you with these life-changing, earth-shattering, mind-blowing insights. Right? This is the kind of attack that I'm under here. And this little fella started moving. And so I see, he's not a piece of grass. He's one of God's creatures. He was crawling on my neck. I thought I'd smashed it, but it's still going.
Exploitation. Sometimes in the same society it's used for both. I was recently, oh my god, I think this is like my favorite quote that I've ever come across from a shaman. So it was from a shaman among the Sora, a group in India, and he channeled this. He's working with a young widow, and he channels her husband, and possessed by her dead husband. Presumably, he says something like, "I really want to have sex with you, but I must do it through the body of this shaman." But there are all kinds of examples of shamans exploiting their position, the perception of their power for sex, for food, for resources, for whatever. Shamans are humans. They're people who have self-interested ends and want to use that to get what they want.
Yeah, rabbis are humans, right? They're just as likely to be lustful, angry, selfish, cruel, exploitative as plumbers, as accountants, as soccer players. So that was one of the shocks. I used to have rabbis on a pedestal. So I'm coming to you from the Royal Botanical Gardens here by Sydney Harbour, looking across to the Sydney Opera House.
Yeah, so that's a really fascinating example. Like, two things I wanted to mention in response was, one, I have a very similar opinion to you about the criticisms of the term religion, right, applied broadly. There's lots of legitimacy to those critiques, but I think you can bypass them in large respect by just applying a sensible definition. That people think you can't do that, but I disagree. So I'm completely on board with your approach to shamanism. But
Okay, let's have a look at this little creature who just alighted on my neck in the middle of... See, he's alive. I thought that was a piece of grass. Doesn't he look like a piece of grass? But it's alive. Isn't that weird? I smacked that off my neck, and then it started moving. Would you not think that's a piece of grass?
what you were just saying about, people performing social roles and shamans being like parts of community, often associated with healing, and can actually be, healers providing herbal remedies and actual medicines in communities as well. But I think to Western audiences, they're aware of and often very critical of the people who claim to channel dead relatives, right? Many people are aware of cold reading and hot reading techniques, right? So for those that aren't, but people appearing to solicit the information, but really using kind of manipulative techniques in order for you to give them the information, or hot reading being just that you collect the information through other sources, like maybe you get people to write cards down and then extract the information from it. So there's a lot of very prevalent critiques of that kind of, the word is escaping me for those people, but people who channel the dead. Mediums, yeah. But on the other side, there's the current growing industry around psychedelic experiences and ayahuasca ceremonies, and the kind of fascination in the tech spheres with taking trips into the jungle to have vision quests and that kind of thing. And maybe that's always been there. I think if you go to the 80s, you're going to find yuppies also expressing interest in it. But seeing those things as within the same arena, I think, is something that people don't do, and they would be more wary of applying the same kind of criticisms that they would to mediums operating in a paranormal sphere as they would to applying criticisms to something which is seen as a non-Western cultural context. So yeah, but I personally just feel that like you say, humans are humans. Some of them are good, some of them are, and even the ones that are engaged in the exploitative behaviors are often in other aspects of their life very nice. So yeah, it's a complicated topic, and I guess, Andrew, that leads nicely to the connection to modern gurus. And I don't know how closely you follow modern gurus, the kind of people we talk about, Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein and other such figures. But just broadly speaking, initially, do you yourself see, kind of parallels there, or you think they're kind of different phenomenon with quite strong divisions?
Yes, I don't think those are mutually incompatible. I definitely think shamans are different from modern gurus. I definitely think shamans are different from modern gurus, and I think there are probably parallels. So I can try to elaborate on some parallels, but maybe it would be better if I asked you directed questions to pull out the parallels?
Sure, I know a couple of gurus.
Yeah, so I guess we can go from two ends. One end would be to start by saying, to what extent are gurus promising people control over uncertainty? Like there is probably things that people find unpredictable or uncontrollable in their lives, whether it's their status or what.
So I remember when I'd be doing a show and people want to know what I thought who was going to win the election, something like that, and I've never placed much stock in my predictions. Like making predictions is a very, very minor part of my show, but people want assurance. That's why they were asking. In a confusing, discombobulating world, people want comfort and assurance.
Whatever. And the first parallel would be that gurus would promise some control while potentially not actually being able to provide it. Do you think that happens?
Yeah, so the two things that immediately come to mind are one, the response in the pandemic where many gurus leaned into the vaccine narratives or promoting alternative treatments, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, right? And in those respects, yes, it's a very direct medical setting, but they are in it.
Yeah, Dennis Prager would do that. He was like all on board with the Zelensky protocol, right? And Prager's, often, oh, look at that magnificent cruise ship moving into Sydney Harbour, but Prager has often gotten on board with various solutions to life's ills, from nutritional ones to medical ones. So very, very guru-like. Remember the Zelensky protocol, like his protocol for dealing with for curing COVID with ivermectin.
In essence, claiming that they have the correct procedures, the correct medicines that you need to guard your health, and that there are these threats that other people don't recognize as threats. And so there's a parallel there, but there also seems to me like this might be a bit of a stretch, but let's see what you think. Jordan Peterson and the more like symbolically inclined and maybe slightly religiously inclined, in his case heavily religiously inclined gurus, I think they, and actually maybe some of the secular ones, present a kind of spiritual health, right? That like people today, modern secular society, in a kind of Weberian way, are very alienated, they're very atomized, and they've lost their heart, right? And so if they engage with the kind of thinking, the kind of philosophies, or the kind of traditions that they're highlighting, people can regain their vitality and spiritual essence, and in many cases become the young men that they were supposed to be. So that seems to strike me as like two potential clear parallels.
Yeah, no, I think both those make sense. I think the second one, I would imagine that it would be especially potent or effective if it could be connected to things that people are dissatisfied in their life, things that people want control over or want to resolve that they currently cannot. You want, whatever X, you want to be more healthy, you want this, something that people can't get control over, but there would be some promise of a service.
A partner.
Yes, exactly, yes. And so if we're going back into this parallel with shamanism, the next question would be, what gives these people the credibility? These people are presumably claiming to have insight, have solutions into problems that are otherwise very hard to resolve, into information that is otherwise very difficult to acquire. The technique, again, that shamans often use, as magical religious specialists, they use a number of techniques to create perceptions of authority. But the one that I have really been thinking about and talking about is this showing that you're fundamentally different from other people. So you mentioned something like this earlier, that they think about the world in a different way. From an early age, they have different kinds of minds. But then the next, if we're thinking about the parallel, the next question I would ask you is, are there ways in which the gurus that you just mentioned also create authority or credibility by promoting perceptions of differing fundamentally or in interesting ways from normal humans?
Yeah, so there is like you say, there's the part where there's often these references to always thinking differently, right? That they just see the world in a way that other people never could. And like there's this clip that I might insert here where you have Eric and Brett Weinstein, the brothers, discussing their experiences together and basically saying that they are somewhat unique in that when they find themselves in a situation where everyone else, every scientific authority is telling them that they're wrong, that gives them pleasure and more certainty that they're right.
You and I share a certain delight when we do our homework and we discover something interesting and absolutely nobody else gets it. That would feel bad to most people because they would feel like, what am I doing wrong? Why does nobody else understand this point? To you and me, that feels good. It is to know that you have achieved something, you have discovered something, and that nobody else can even recognize it. Gives you some sort of sense of how far ahead you might be.
It seems pathological, but like I see it, but from my perspective, but that strikes me as what you were talking about, always having the shifted perception. But the other component is that many of them claim to undergo a kind of trial by fire. In the modern environment, it's often a public cancellation effort. And in those cases, they often say that, where other people would have folded or kind of bowed down to the mob, that they were, to steal a Jordan Peterson metaphor, like they would go into the belly of the whale, fight the dragon, and come back.
Yeah, so Z-Man's been doxxed, but he's gone into the belly of the whale. He's fought the demon of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and he's come back stronger than ever, still knocking out a column a day.
back, not necessarily like fully transformed, but more realized the person that they always felt that they were, and now the world gets to see. And they also do tend to say explicitly, I'd lean into Brett Weinstein because he kind of fits the mold so well, but he explicitly talked about identifying others who are reliable because of undergoing similar ordeals. And, you know, I think he's less applicable to the kind of toxic guru approach, but like Sam Harris, in a way, displays a great sympathy for anybody that has underwent kind of cancellation efforts. So I don't know if that's stretching the parallel, but public cancellation seems to be potentially playing the role of a ritual transformative event, which gives you like special insight and power.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, if you can survive being cancelled, all right? It's like you survived the Holocaust. It must mean that you're special. But in reality, just because you survive cancellation or you survive a genocide doesn't make you any wiser, kinder, stronger, more clear, right? It doesn't convey, any virtue just because you survived a cancellation or a genocide.
it's interesting. I do want to be careful about not stretching the analogy.
What about, so this is my perception, I'd like to ask you a question. So my perception is that shamanism in large part, or at least in many traditions, is a apprenticeship system where you do take a guru or a master and, you learn the techniques over time. And in many cases, the kind of secular gurus, they don't emphasize that. They emphasize, the ersatz knowledge. Maybe they had some figures who, inspired them, but in most occasions they're saying it was their unique insight, and they were interested in other people with unique insights, but it's fundamentally coming from them. And my impression with shamans is rather that they're tapping into a power which already exists and traditions and systems which are like kind of like a profession, like you say. So is that a distinction, or is that specific schools or cultures of shamanism?
Yeah, so I don't know systematic work that has looked at the frequency with which shamans train with, or, have learned from particular people. I do share your impression that it's quite common. At the same time, two things come to mind. So first, it is the case that shamans sometimes do build credibility without necessarily bringing on a teacher. They might, from an early age, enter trance and then spontaneously heal people. But the other thing that you actually remind me of are prophets. And I think,
Or you can start out as a commentator on someone else's blog, then graduate to having your own blog, then your own podcast, and your own YouTube channel.
special class of shamans where, if we think about shamans as service providers who enter non-ordinary states, prophets often are also promising services or promising control, but over problems that are much larger. And so, prophets are co-creating with their audiences narratives about the end of the world or large society being pit against you and your group. And they often use similar techniques as what we might think of as more mundane shamans, narratives of difference, narratives of fundamental transformation, often also explicitly trans, but the scope of the problem is much larger. And so, maybe they have some of their authority or expertise draw on a tradition, draw on learning from someone, but of course they also have to build something much larger than that. It's not only, okay, yes, I have the training to treat these illnesses, but I, for some reason, have to be the guy, have to be the person who can get the British colonial monster out of here, or who can, bring back the planes that brought incredible gifts, or who can liberate us from the end of the world. I also just wanted to be clear and careful about not overstretching the analogy with the gurus, because,
Okay, I think that will do it for today. Gonna get ready for Shabbat. It's 4:29 p.m. here, Friday afternoon. Got to get a move on. Shabbos waits for no man. Bye-bye.